The Yanta aimed lasers at our pilots. That Russian move was extremely dangerous. On November 19th, 2025, off the coast of Scotland, a British pilot is flying a $200 million aircraft. Then suddenly, bam! His world turns into a wall of intense neon green. Temporary vision loss, disorientation, music, and within seconds, the entire crew is at risk of going down into the freezing waters of the North Sea. Beneath that pitch-black surface, on the deck of the Russian ship Yantar, music, a sailor may have been smirking. He probably thought that high-powered music laser dazzler made him untouchable. But he was completely wrong. That laser didn't scare anyone off. It was more like switching on a spotlight in the jungle and calling in the Predators. And this time, the Predator was a coordinated US Navy response that Moscow never saw coming. First, look at the map. The Yantar is here, inside the UK's Music Exclusive Economic Zone, the EEZ, just 45 miles off the coast of Scotland. This stretch of water is one of the choke points of the global internet, where critical undersea cables like Cantat3 Music and Atlantic Crossing 1 run across the seabed. Think about this, 97% of financial data, work emails, and even the YouTube video you're watching right now all pass through fiber optic cables lying music silently on the ocean floor in this region. If those lines were ever severed, Amazon deliveries could stall, your music credit card could become useless plastic, and Wall Street could go dark. This is not just a fishing zone. It is the master switch of the Western economy. As for Yantar, Project 2010, Moscow describes vessels like this as oceanographic research ships. Sounds harmless, doesn't it? But in NATO terminology, that's often seen as a polite label for a cable monitoring intelligence vessel. Yantar actually belongs to Guji, Russia's main directorate of deep-sea research, a branch built specifically to gather intelligence and prepare for underwater disruption missions in wartime. It carries multi-frequency music sonar, seismic equipment, and most importantly, 2 deep-diving submersibles. Music, the AS-37 Rus and AS-39 Consul. These can descend to 6,000 meters. Their robotic arms are not there to collect coral. Music, they are built to latch onto cables and cut them. Legally, a Music Yantar had the right to be there, but that night the UK had every reason to believe it was doing something suspicious. This was not a guess. It was a judgment based on the ship's long and troubling track record. Yantar has a very murky history. The ship was seen lingering near the Nord Stream pipeline shortly before the 2022 explosion. Throughout 2023 and 2024, it was also repeatedly observed near submarine cables in the Atlantic. And this was already the second time that year that Yantar had entered British waters. The concern was obvious. This appeared to be part of an ongoing Kremlin effort to locate and map every critical submarine cable and pipeline linking the UK to the rest of the world. The goal seemed clear, to identify the weakest points in case of a future conflict. And its actions that night only reinforced those concerns. Since early November, Yantar had switched off its Automatic Identification System, or AIS, leaving only its maritime radar active. For anyone unfamiliar, AIS is basically a vessel's radio-transmitted license plate. Civilian ships are supposed to keep it on to help avoid collisions. For commercial ships, disabling AIS is illegal. For military ships, it sends a message: I don't want to be watched. But the most suspicious detail was this. Even with its AIS off, the ship continued moving in a slow zigzag pattern at just 3 to 5 knots. In naval terms, movement like that usually points to one thing: seabed scanning. Turning off AIS may fool merchant traffic. But for the Royal Air Force's P-8A Poseidon, it means nothing. The P-8 uses AN/APY-10 radar to detect metallic structures, hull shapes, and wave patterns, regardless of darkness. At the same time, its onboard systems cross-check the signal and confirm. Radar sees the ship, but AIS is silent. Picture it like this. You see a black truck rolling through an upscale neighborhood at 2 a.m. with its headlights off and its license music plate covered. You don't need to be a detective to know it's not making deliveries. It's up to something. The threat music was identified immediately. The P-8A activated its alert procedures and descended for visual and electronic confirmation. Using electronic support measures, or ESM, music, along with synthetic aperture radar and infrared sensors, the aircraft scanned the sea surface. Despite the darkness, it picked up unusual water disturbance and heat signatures from the submarine as it surfaced. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to confirm reconnaissance activity. The moment the Russians noticed the British aircraft, they reacted fast. They activated defensive systems and an optical dazzler, aiming music directly at the cockpit. The purpose was clear: overwhelm the camera and the pilot's vision, force the aircraft music to pull away, and buy time for the submarine to get clear. Pointing a laser at an aircraft is not some harmless prank. It is a serious gray zone action, and in that moment the Russians made a major mistake. The instant that laser beam switched on, it set off a chain of NATO electronic responses, a coordinated trap already waiting beneath the sea. The British pilot in the P-8 was affected by the glare. Instinctively, he pulled back on the controls, sending the aircraft climbing sharply to get outside the laser's effective range. On the deck of Yantar, some sailor may have been smiling, convinced he had music driven off the intruder. But that was the illusion. The British pilot was not retreating in panic. He was following NATO's strict music response protocol. Better to disengage by the book than take unnecessary risks, but never lose track of the target. Just before turning away, the P-8 deployed a series of sonobuoys and uploaded the target's exact coordinates to the Link 16 network. Think of Link Music 16 as a giant military group chat. But instead of text messages, it sends live coordinates and targeting data to Allied forces in the area. Human eyes may be overwhelmed, but machine ears are not. Before leaving, the British P-8 successfully marked the location of the incident. And who received the message? The U.S. Navy. You might ask, why was the U.S. there at exactly that moment? Because in reality, the U.S. had been there the whole time. In the current geopolitical climate, the North Sea is part of the GIUK gap, the critical route Russia's northern fleet must pass through to reach the Atlantic. Since 2022, NATO has maintained a policy of persistent presence there, keeping a continuous and credible military posture in the region. It's like a police car sitting in the dark at the end of the street. When trouble starts, nobody needs to call it. The lights are already ready to come on. Beneath the sea, the Virginia-class submarine USS Indiana music was already waiting. It moved into the baffles, the blind spot behind Yantar, and began collecting detailed acoustic music signatures from the AS-37 submersible as it started its underwater transit. Did Russia think their music mini-sub was invisible? To a sonar operator aboard a Virginia-class submarine, the sound of those Russian engines would have stood out clearly. We heard everything. USS Indiana remained virtually silent, using its bow sonar to record music, the full underwater track of the Russian submersible. But Russia's biggest mistake was not under the water, it was in the sky. To accurately direct that laser toward the British cockpit, Yantar had to activate its navigation sensors and high-powered targeting systems. And the moment that radar music came online, it sent out an unmistakable electronic signal. It shattered the silence of the electromagnetic spectrum. At 35,000 feet, another U.S. Navy P-8A was flying in total radio silence. But this aircraft heard that electronic scream. This P-8 was not there to take pictures. It was a specialized signals intelligence platform on a SIGINT mission. Its AN/ALQ-240 music system did not react by jamming right away. Instead, it behaved like a forensic recorder at a crime scene. It captured the live electronic fingerprint, the exact frequency, pulse rate, and bandwidth of music of the Russian radar. The Link 16 data provided the location. This ESM data provided the method to counter it. The Russians' music thought they had just bought themselves 15 minutes of breathing room to launch their submersible. In reality, they had just handed NATO the full blueprint for how to shut them down. Now the AS-37 submersible was in the water. The Yantar's captain was holding his music breath, waiting. He believed the sky above was clear. But this is where the United States began the psychological pressure. The U.S. Navy P-8, still hidden in the darkness, suddenly sent out a narrow radar pulse that simulated a targeting lock straight into the area. It did not strike. It did not escalate. It simply brushed across Yantar's antennas and disappeared. In military terms, this was the knock. It was like walking down a dark alley and hearing the click of a weapon right behind your ear. a cold, unmistakable message. We know exactly where you are. The Russian captain was no amateur. He understood immediately that his ship had been exposed, so he played a classic deception move, split the target. Yantar shut down its radar to disappear electronically. At the same time, the AS-37 below released an acoustic decoy. The decoy imitated engine noise and drifted west, while the real submersible quietly moved east. It was the underwater version of a thief throwing a rock into the bushes to distract the guard dog. Russia hoped the American submarine would go after the false contact, but they forgot who they were dealing with. Far below, USS Indiana did not react the way they expected. Sonar specialists aboard Virginia-class submarines are trained to tell the difference between tiny natural noises and real underwater machinery from miles away. They ignored the decoy, but instead of rushing in, Indiana executed what could be described as a reverse track maneuver. Think of it like football. You fake left to pull the defender out of position, then cut sharply the other way and slip in behind him. That is exactly what Indiana did. As the Russian sonar searched forward, the American submarine moved into the dead water roughly 900 yards off Yantar's stern. The Russians were blind. They thought they were still the hunters. In reality, the predator was already directly behind them. Then came the response. A ruthless, precise three-layer counter. First came communication disruption. The AS-37 relied on hydroacoustic signals from the mothership for navigation and coordination. At that moment, the US P-8 activated electronic warfare measures. Music. Using advanced frequency hopping capability, the Americans flooded the exact Russian communication channel with intense interference. Imagine the Russian captain trying to whisper instructions into the submersible's ear, while the United States puts a megaphone beside it and drowns everything out. The result? Communication collapsed. On Yantar's screens, the submersible's telemetry disappeared, replaced by errors and broken data. The AS-37 was now blind and deaf, drifting in the black water without knowing its precise position relative to the target, music, or even the mothership. The sabotage mission had been stopped, and while the Russians were still panicking over the lost signal, the US delivered the final psychological blow. From its position just off the stern, USS Indiana chose to reveal itself, briefly. It emitted a single active music sonar pulse. Ping! A hard metallic music note cut through the water. The unmistakable acoustic signature of an American nuclear-powered attack submarine rang out like a sledgehammer against the Russian hull. Music. The entire crew aboard Yantar froze. In that instant, they understood the truth. The opposing submarine was not miles away. It was directly beneath them. At the same time, the British P-8, its crew's vision recovered, circled back, turning on its searchlights and music radar, sweeping across the Russian ship from above. The message music to Moscow could not have been clearer. Your submersible is isolated. Your ship is tracked. You are surrounded, from the sky and from the seabed. Leave now or face the consequences. The Russian captain knew music. The operation was finished. Not a single shot was fired, yet they had been comprehensively outplayed by NATO's information dominance and coordination. The order came: recover the submersible immediately. Yantar turned north and began heading home, wounded in reputation if not in steel. The final image of that night was the perfect definition of humiliation. On the P-8 sensor screens, the Yantar crew could be seen frantically hauling the AS-37 back onto the deck like intruders. Music caught in the act. The lasers were off. The ship steamed straight toward Murmansk. Above, the British and American P-8S flew wing to wing, escorting the unwanted visitor out of the EEZ. Not a single shot was fired, but make no mistake, this was a crushing victory, and the lesson was clear. This was the collapse of a brute force mindset against an information-driven one. Russia brought a 20th century tool, the laser. Loud, aggressive, and visually intimidating. They believed that blinding a pilot would decide the encounter, but the US responded with a 21st century music advantage. Multi-domain integration. We do not rely only on eyesight. We see through the electromagnetic music spectrum. We hear through sonar, and we communicate through data. You may overwhelm a pilot's vision, but you cannot disappear from the sensor network music of the United States Navy. While Russia tried to play cat and mouse, the United States turned the ocean into a digital cage, and it proved something essential about modern conflict. Whoever controls the information controls the battlefield. This interception music did more than protect a fiber optic cable. It served as a stark reminder that the arteries of the Western economy are guarded by some of the quietest music and most capable warriors on Earth. So here's the question. After a setback like this, do you think Russia would risk returning to these waters to target cables again? And next time, if they send a real nuclear submarine music instead of a so-called research ship, should the US still limit itself to a warning? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth military analysis from Navy Vector. Bye for now, and see you in the next one.